page 25. We had just come to the end. Let me just rehearse a little bit on page 25 what we had said. We asked, first of all, could Jesus have sinned? And our answer was no. But the purpose of the temptation was still realized. And we pointed out that there are percentages of the temptation. We often do sin, and so we don't feel the full brunt of that temptation. He never did. So he's the expert on temptation, even though he never sinned. He experienced a full degree of every temptation. Then we ask, which is true concerning Jesus' temptation? It was not possible to sin, or it was possible not to sin. Now, which one was it? Not possible to sin. And that's because he is the God-man. He could not sin. But then the question comes, well, suppose if his deity is keeping him from sinning, then there's no real problem. He's going around through life saying, I don't worry about it. My deity won't let me sin. Not true. So we're going to have to find out how that works. And so that's what we're going to do tonight, beginning on page 26. I believe that Jesus lived his entire life without using any of his omni attributes at all, at any time. Now, I'm going to go through those: omnipresence, omnipotence, and omniscience, and we're going to look at the evidence normally given, the scriptures normally used in theologies to prove that Jesus used his omnipresence. We're going to look at the scriptures, and then you're going to tell me whether they prove it. How's that? John 1:48. So we'll need to be turning some in this. John 1 in verse 48. Remember, this is omnipresence. What's omnipresence? Everywhere present, all at the same time. Okay? Now, verse 48 says, Nathanael said to him, from where do you know me? And Jesus answered and said to him, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. All right, that's the first one. I saw you under the fig tree. Apparently Jesus was not there, but he saw him under the fig tree. In John 3:13, Jesus says, and no man has ascended up to heaven, but he that came down from heaven, even the Son of Man, who is in heaven. Now, who has any version besides King James or King James 2? What does yours? Did I read that right with you? The last part of the verse was, even the Son of Man who is in heaven. And then you have a period at Son of Man. You don't have who is in heaven in that version. Any other versions that don't have it? You don't? Okay. See, the difference here is that in King James and King James 2, those majority manuscripts do have that. The older manuscripts do not. Anything in NASB, NIV, that line of evidence does not have the who is in heaven. So now, whether it's genuine or not, it is questionable. See? There's some question about whether that is a genuine phrase. And because of that, I wouldn't put too much stock in it. I wouldn't build a doctrine on that, say, because there's a question about whether it's genuine. So I'm going to ignore that one. John 14:23. Yes, sir.
I got a footnote on that verse where Jesus said that the reason that John said the Son of Man which is in heaven is that when he wrote that, that's after Jesus said I had already went back to heaven.
Well, isn't he quoting Jesus? See, those are Jesus' words, supposedly. That makes good sense. Possibly. Or maybe it's so logical that somebody might add that, as the copies go on and on. But in any case, that is Jesus' words. But because it's questionable, I wouldn't want to build doctrine on it. John 14:23. And Jesus said to him, "If a man will love me, he will keep my words, and my Father will love him, and we will come unto him and make our abode with him." So they say, well, look, he's going to make his abode with everybody. Therefore, he must be omnipresent. The Son must be omnipresent. Now, let's talk about John 1. Well, let's talk about this one first, and then we'll go back and talk about 148. When is Jesus and when is the Father going to come and abide with these people? Is that present or future time? Future. We will, see? So that's at a future time. After the resurrection, then Jesus is using his omni attributes. But while he's here on the earth, that is a future time to his sojourn on the earth. We will come to him. So I think that's a future thing, and he's not talking about Jesus in Jesus' lifetime. Now, John 1:48, when he saw Nathanael under the fig tree, he didn't say, "I saw you because I was standing there." He just said, "I saw you." He may have had a vision. I saw you in a vision, or it was revealed to him some way. It doesn't make him omnipresent. So it seems to me those three verses, and that's all I've ever seen used, seems to me that they do not prove that Jesus was using his omnipresence. Beside that, how did Jesus get from one place to the other? He walked, or maybe he rode a donkey times, but he was never, he said, "I must needs go through Samaria." He was walking, going through. So there's no indication that he ever popped off from one place to the other while he was here on the earth. He had to cover the distance, time and space. He was limited by that time and space while he was here. I think that the omnipresence is probably a given. Most people would say, "Oh yeah, I think you're right. He was not using his omnipresence." That's the easy one. So I put it first to get it out of the way. Now, omnipotence. When you think of that, say, well, Jesus did not use his omnipotence. Well, wait a minute, he did some very special things. True. And I've listed some things here. Did I write in? No, I didn't. I just gave you scriptures. Okay? I just put the 7 miracles of John's Gospels, and they're typical of the miracles that are listed in the life of Christ in the other Gospels. Chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. You want to guess what it is? Water to wine. Very good. You're not guessing. You knew what it was. Water to wine. Chapter 4. Healing of the nobleman's son. Healing of the nobleman's son. Chapter 5. The lame man at the pool of Bethesda. The lame man at the pool of Bethesda. So we have water into wine, healing of the nobleman's son, and the healing of the lame man at the pool of Bethesda. Chapter 6. Feeding of the 5,000. Feeding of the 5,000. The last part of chapter 6. Walking on water. Walking on water. I've got them written down here. I know what it is. It's hard to bring them up like that. Chapter 9. The healing of the blind man. The healing of the blind man. Chapter 11. I am the resurrection and the life. Lazarus, right? Lazarus. Those are the 7 miracles around which John builds his gospel. Now, let's start at the bottom. Did anyone else ever raise anybody from the dead? Sure. Paul, Peter. How about anybody heal a blind man? Sure. Anybody else walk on water? Peter. Anybody ever feed a large number of people? I got that. Yeah, a lot of people have been. I mean, the food was supplied. Remember the widow? Sure, the widow and the oil kept on going. Yeah, multiplying food, feeding people was not a new thing. Anybody ever heal a lame man? Sure. How about nobleman's son would be the same kind of thing. Turning water into wine. I don't know if anybody else ever did that, but I know somebody who made water pure by throwing in a branch or whatever. So there have been water miracles done. So these things are, for the most part, done by other people in the Bible. So if these prove that Jesus is God or Jesus is omnipotent, then Peter is omnipotent. He walked on the water too, see? So I don't think that they prove it. So I'm up on page 27 now. Do they prove it? I think not. Now, what was John's purpose in writing his book? Chapter 20, verse 30. Right, exactly. That's it. And many other signs truly did Jesus, 20, 30, in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written for this purpose, that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, who, incidentally, is the Son of God. See, these are not miracles to prove his deity. They are miracles to prove his messiahship. Now, what about these scriptures? Let's look at some in John. John 5:19. Then answered Jesus and said to them, Verily, verily, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do. For what things soever he does, these also the Son does likewise. He does nothing of himself. We have to take Jesus' word for that. Look at 5:30. I can of my own self do nothing. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not my own will, but the will of the Father who sent me. See? I can do nothing of myself. Now, Mark 6:5, we read that Jesus could do no mighty work there because of their unbelief. So he was limited by that, at least. They could do no mighty work in Nazareth. Now, look at Matthew 11. What were the Israelites looking for? For whom were they looking? Messiah. They weren't looking for the Son of God, were they? They were looking for Messiah. When John was in jail, this is on Matthew 11 too, when John had heard in prison of the works of Christ, he sent two of his disciples and said to him, Are you he that should come, or do we look for another? Are you the Messiah, or do we look for another that's going to come later? And Jesus said to them, Go and show John again those things which you do hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. See, what he's saying is, are you the Messiah? Well, look at the signs. You ought to know from the signs that indeed I am the Messiah. See? So these signs are signs of his messiahship. They are not signs of his deity. Because when Messiah comes, he will do these things for his people. So I take it then that Jesus is saying, I am not doing these things The Father is doing them. I can do nothing of myself. The Father shows me what to do. So I don't think any of his miracles were expressions of his omnipotence. The third omni is omniscience. Now, the scriptures that are used begin with Mark chapter 2. Verses 6 to 8. When he said, your sins be forgiven you, we read this before. Now, in verse 6, there were certain of the scribes sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, why does this man thus speak blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God only? Now they were reasoning this thing in their hearts. And immediately Jesus perceived in his spirit that they so reasoned within themselves, and he said to them, why do you reason these things in your hearts? He read their minds. He knew what they were saying. Well, that's pretty good. Certainly beyond what we could do. But he perceived in his spirit. Now, we don't know where that perception came from, but somehow he knew that what these people were thinking. That's pretty good. John 11 and verse 4. When Lazarus is sick and they are a ways away from him, in John 11, and verse 4. And when Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. Now, I think when he said not unto death, he meant ultimately he won't die. And then in verse 11, or verse 14, then Jesus said to them, Lazarus is dead. Now, he's not there. But he says, Lazarus is dead. How did he know? He knew in some special way. And so many say, look, that's his omniscience. And then in Matthew 24, 9 to 14, and this is all the prophecies of Matthew 24, and there are many of them. Some of them have taken place, not in Matthew 24, but some prophecies which Jesus prophesied have come to pass. And here in Matthew 24, he says various things, like in verse 9, they shall deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Well, that's a prophecy. Hasn't happened yet, but it will. And then he says, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, then shall the end come. So he knows something about the future, and he's prophesying about that. So he knows more than the ordinary man. I can't resist saying this much about verse 14. Are you looking at it? This gospel of the kingdom will be preached to all the world is not the gospel which we preach today. You should not use that verse to say we must preach the gospel to the whole world before the Lord can come back. The Lord could come back right now. The rapture. This is talking about the tribulation period, and during the tribulation time, the gospel of the kingdom, which Jesus preached, which the disciples preached until 70 AD, that's the gospel we're talking about. It's the gospel of the kingdom which will be preached in the tribulation period, and that will go to all the world. And then the end will come, then will Jesus return to the earth to set up the kingdom. Just that much. That was a little aside, and there's no extra charge. Now, on the next page, we looked at those things that Jesus did, and they are spectacular. But first of all, what does omniscience mean? Knowing what? How much? All. All. How much can you not know and still know everything? You can't not know nothing, right? We're talking about English today. You can't not know nothing. If you don't know something, anything, then you don't know everything. Now, did Jesus ever not know something? Mark chapter 11 and verse 13. Jehovah's Witnesses will tie you in a knot. If you say Jesus uses his omniscience on the earth, he's God, he knows everything, well, let me show you something, he'll say. He'll get his little green book out, and you'll be in trouble. Chapter 11 of Mark, verse 13. And seeing a fig tree afar off having leaves, he came if perhaps he might find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of figs was not yet. Do you think from that verse he expected to find something on that tree? That's the way it reads. Looks like he expected to find figs on there. And when he didn't find any figs on there, he cursed the tree. I mean, he swore at it, but he said that no man eat fruit from you forever. And then later on they come by and it's dried up. So it seems like he expected to find figs there. Then in 13:32 of Mark 13:32, but of that day and hour knows no man, that is the time of his coming, knows no man, no, not the angels who are in heaven, neither the Son. The Son does not know, at that point, he did not know the time of his return. Now, if you cannot, if nothing is accepted in order to be omniscient, he was not using his omniscience. He didn't know something. It seems to me then that we have to ask, what did Jesus say about his knowledge? John 8:28. And Jesus said, when you've lifted the Son of Man up, then shall you know that I am he, and that I do nothing of myself. But as the Father has taught me, I speak these things. That's where he learned it. As the Father taught him, he spoke. John 12, verse 49. Even more emphatic, I think. I have not spoken of myself, but the Father who sent me, he gave me a commandment what I should say and what I should speak. That sounds to me as though he was not using his omniscience. He was depending upon the Father to tell him what to say and what to speak. Now, I think then, because of that we can see Jesus was operating in his humanity while he was here on the earth, depending upon the Holy Spirit, depending upon the Father, but operating only in his humanity as the second Adam. He was still God, bottom of page 28. He was still God, the God-man, therefore he could not sin. The deity is still there. And because the person is one, he has a human nature, he has a divine nature, but the person is one. And by the way, it is the person who does the sin. It is the person who acts. You have two natures. You have an old nature, you have a new nature. But it is not either of those natures that acts. It is you who acts. My old nature doesn't do anything. My new nature doesn't do anything. I do something, either in dependence on one or the other, or at the behest of one or the other, but I am the one who does it. And I cannot just pass off the blame and say, oh, it was my old nature, it was my new nature, whatever. No, it is the person who does it. See? And so Jesus had two natures, but it was the person who did these things. And it was the person who went through the temptation, and it was that person who did not sin. But I believe that he did it only in his humanity. He went through only in his humanity. Now, what I want to show you is my understanding. What do you think of that? That's some artwork. You know, the week before I came here, I asked a good friend of mine if he said, I'll make any chart you want on my computer. He just loves to do it. He made me 4 or 5 nice charts. They're home on the table. Anyway, this is, he would be embarrassed if I used this. In any case, this is, I picture Jesus going through the temptation in this way, that he's like the man riding his bicycle across this wire from one building to another, and he's doing it with a safety net down at the bottom. But if he goes all the way across and then all the way back, is he if he doesn't fall, is he using the net? Unless he falls, he doesn't use the net, does he? The net's there, but the net is a guarantee that he won't fall to the ground. He can't fall to the ground because the net's there. But if he doesn't use the net, he did it without the net. I think that's the temptation. I believe that Jesus was operating only in his humanity, and he went through the temptation, but if he had slipped, the deity would have caught him. He could not sin, see? But he didn't fall. He didn't use the net, see? So you can say, no, he could not sin. But he did that in his humanity. Therefore, we now have a man in the heavens who has been through everything that we've been through, tempted in all points, and yet he did not sin as a man, see? When the first Adam went through temptation, he fell, having the same nature that the second Adam had. He fell. The second Adam came along, and he went through the temptation in only his humanity, and now he is in the heavens. He knows what we've been going through. Now, that to me, that's the answer to whether Jesus Christ could sin or could not sin. No, he could not sin. He's God. Well, then, what does that mean to me? It means to me that he went through the temptation as a man. And I, as a man, can call upon the same strength that he called upon the Spirit of the living God who dwells in me. That's it. Now, I have one thing that he didn't have. What's that? I have a fallen nature. I have a sin nature. But that's not a part of my humanity, and I don't have to succumb to that. When I do, of course, we have the confession. If we confess our sin, he is faithful and righteous to forgive us our sin, to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. But these things, 1 John 2:1 says, these things are written unto you that you not what? That you sin not. And if any man should sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous one. And that's where I believe the answer lies. It's not in changing what the Scripture says. It's in finding what it says and then putting it all together. Now, the fourth thing, number 4 on page 29. What was the purpose of the temptation? I give you 2 possibilities. To see if he would sin or to demonstrate that he would not sin. I'm going to wait. To demonstrate that he would not sin. Right. God was not saying up there and saying, I wonder if he's going to sin. No. He did that to demonstrate to the world and perhaps to angelic beings that Jesus Christ would not sin. It's the same kind of thing that they had up in Michigan when they built the bridge. Now, that's getting better, isn't it? It's a bridge. They built this bridge over a long span, And before they went to let anybody on it, they decided they were going to test it. And so they put trucks, loaded trucks. They just moved them in off Route 30 here. They filled it up in about 5 minutes. All the way across, trucks, loaded down. And they loaded that to the specification for which that bridge was to be built. Now, why did they do that? To see if it would fall? No. To demonstrate that it would not fall. And if you're the man driving this truck, you're glad that they're not trying to see if it's going to fall. See? To demonstrate that he would not sin. That's what God's doing. And he's demonstrating it for us, so that we can understand that his grace is sufficient in every kind of trial. Remember again, there is no temptation taking you but that which is common to man. And God will, with the temptation, provide the way of escape that you may. Say it. I didn't. Be able to bear it. Thank you. I ran out of words. Yeah, that's it. See? The provision has been made. The example has been given. And we have a Savior who has gone that way ahead of us.